and welcome back to another episode of The Pilot Principle, the podcast where we dissect the first episode, the pilot, of a series to see if it has got all the components to trick us into watching the entire series, or at least the second episode. For the next 20-ish or 30-ish minutes, it's hard to say because these episodes have slowly gotten a little longer, I will be running you through the pilot episode of HBO's True Detective Night Country. When giving a review of the pilot episode, I personally like to take into consideration the story, of course, the characters, the pace, and debate possible serial arcs and chat about the end of episode hook. I also give my personal opinions on any standout moments, as well as any parts that didn't quite hit the mark. Finally, we will talk about if I will be continuing with the series and why you may feel the same or completely disagree. With all of that being said, let's get the ball rolling with the pilot synopsis as provided by Sky Atlantic, which is where you can watch True Detective Night Country in the UK. With all of that being said, let's get the ball rolling with the pilot synopsis as provided by Sky Atlantic, which is where I watched True Detective Night Country in the UK. Two detectives tackle a missing persons case. That was the first synopsis I came across, and it was just so bland that I had to look for another. It's weird because the same episode on the same channel but shown at different times gave two different synopsises, which I don't understand. But this one was slightly more interesting. When 8 men vanish, Navarro convinces Danvers that the case is linked to a past murder. Jodie Foster stars. Isn't that nice? I mean, it's true. Jodie Foster does in fact star in True Detective Night Country. And 8 men do indeed vanish, and that is certainly a big draw. 8 is a big number of people to just go poof. So it's definitely the sort of synopsis that would make me press record. Okay, let's get into the credits. And I always start with the credits because I just find it really interesting to know who's been in it, who's written it, who's directed it, what else have they done. I kind of just like those little bits of information. To start with, disappointingly, True Detective Night Country doesn't really have a pilot title. It's just called Part 1, I think. But Part 1 is better than nothing. And it has an episode length of between 60 and 70 minutes. Now, I actually can't say which one it is because I recorded the episode. And in fact, the episode I recorded was like an hour and 20 minutes long for some reason. So I then had to start doing math. And I haven't done math since A-level. And even that didn't go very well. So I'm just going to round it to the ballpark figures of between 60 and 70 minutes. We also have a series length of 6 episodes, which according to my little bit of research is 2 episodes less than the previous series of True Detective. So that's interesting. Part 1 was written and directed by Issa Lopez, and Issa Lopez has written and directed Tigers Are Not Afraid, and she's also directed 2 episodes of the series Britannia and a few Spanish language films, including Todo Mal y La Boda de Valentina. See, I told you. All those previous episodes where I kept having to pronounce things in French and I kept telling you that I didn't speak French, but I was waiting for my time to shine when something Spanish came along, and that was it. Todo Mal y La Boda de Valentina. Moving on to cast, as the synopsis told us, Jodie Foster stars. So Jodie Foster stars as Liz Danvers, and Foster has a very long and iconic filmography that is mostly across film rather than television. She has starred in Taxi Driver, Silence of the Lambs, Panic Room, Inside Man, and I was today years old when I read, because I didn't realise it, I read it, that Jodie Foster played Tallulah in Bugsy Malone. What? I mean, I have watched all of the films mentioned that she's been in, except for Panic Room. Have I watched? Is that the one that starred Kristen Stewart? I may or may not have watched Panic Room. Either way, I have definitely seen Taxi Driver, but I suppose there was no world where I watched Bugsy Malone and then immediately watched Taxi Driver to put 2 and 2 together. Anyway, that is now my favourite fact that I will be tooting around like the good news. Also on cast, we have Callie Reese, and Callie Reese plays Evangeline Navarro. Reese hasn't starred in many things. In fact, True Detective is the 3rd thing she starred in. So she has starred in Catch the Fair One and Black Flies before True Detective Night Country. Fiona Shaw is also on the list, and Fiona Shaw plays Rose Agnew. And Fiona Shaw, for me at least, is most prominently and permanently fixed in my mind as playing Aunt Petunia, or Petunia Dursley, in the Harry Potter film franchise. She has also starred in Killing Eve, Baptiste, which is one of my favourite British police dramas, True Blood, which I had no idea about, and she was also in the 1990 movie 3 Men and a Little Lady. Don't ever say that when you listen to the pilot principle, you never learn anything new. Finally, on the selected cast list, we have Finn Bennett, who plays Peter Pryor. And Bennett has starred in the series Domina and The Nevers, as well as ITV1's Liar and Top Boy, and Kiri, which is a 2018 Channel 4 series that also starred Sarah Lancashire, Lucian Msamati, Wumi Masaku, Papa Essiedu, and Andy Osho. When I say that Kiri was my favourite British television series of 2018, it does not even begin to describe how much I talked about this series. It's a 4-part series, and man, every 2 seconds, there would just be silence, and then you'd have me being like, man, that Kiri was such a good show. I mean, Lucian Msamati was a fantastic actor. It was one of the first times I think I'd seen Papa Essiedu, and he's now skyrocketed from there. He's done so many great things, including recently The Lazarus Project, which if you've been listening for a while, you know that is one of my most recommended television series. Anyway, I completely forgot that we were talking about Finn Bennett. So the other thing to mention about Finn Bennett is that he sounds British because he has been in all of these British things. And you know what? I like seeing when British people make it out of British television. So good for you. Good for you, Finn Bennett, for now being on True Detective Night Country. Episodes of TDNC are being released weekly on a Monday on Sky Atlantic in the UK and on Sundays on HBO in the US. And also, I did notice Mr. Matthew McConaughey's name as one of the executive producers. And who doesn't love a bit of Matthew McConaughey? In terms of what made me want to watch TDNC, is that faster? TDNC, True Detective Night Country? Yeah, it's definitely faster. In terms of what made me want to watch that series, well, True Detective is actually on my never-ending list. A list of which I'm actually trying to make ending. So in case you don't know, True Detective is an anthology series and Night Country is the 4th series. However, because there are no overlaps in stories throughout the series, I presume, it means that we can just watch Night Country without having watched the previous series. Either way, I thought watching TDNC would make me maybe get to starting True Detective faster. Also, the adverts, they've really been amping this shit up since like December, and it just looked eerie AF, and the whole 8 bodies being found thing in the synopsis also hook, lined and sinkered me into watching the pilot episode. Right, it's time to look over the first 10 minutes of part 1. Why the first 10 minutes, you wonder? Well, I was always taught the first 10 minutes are one of the most crucial parts of any pilot script or feature film script as a writer and as a reader of scripts. By the end of that 10-page mark, you should have gotten to the end of Act 1, or at least the inciting incident. Something must have happened to convince your reader to keep reading and later on your watcher to keep watching. So that's why I always look at the first 10 minutes of a pilot episode. And the first 10 minutes of TDNC Part 1 starts like this. We start with a quote by Hildred Castagini. For we do not know what beasts the night dreams, when its hours grow too long for even God to be awake. And that text or poem or quote is matched with some eerie music and I'm already scared. That then cuts into a snow-covered land that is Alaska, 150 miles north of the Arctic Circle. It is December 17th and it is the last sunset of the year. As the sun goes down, a man hunts a reindeer, but before he can pull the trigger, he watches as the herd, who seem to smell something in the air, collectively charge towards the edge of the cliff, where they fling themselves off to their collective deaths. And then we are at the Tasala Arctic Research Station. And it kind of feels like an international halls. There are loads of people from all over the world and they're doing washing, watching movies, doing some experiments. It all feels very chilled until someone, Clark, starts convulsing. And when somebody asks what's wrong, he simply says, she's awake. And that is kind of the first time I realized that I might be watching a horror. Then it is December the 20th, so it's the 3rd day of night, and a delivery driver turns up at Tasala Research Station. But there is no one in sight. The TV is glitching, playing the twist and shout scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off on loop. A figure darts across the width of a darkened hallway with flickering fluorescent lights, and the delivery driver is clearly thinking that this has gone from funny to strange to worrying, and this is confirmed when he discovers a tongue on the kitchen floor, Sand's body. We then hit the opening sequence, which is played to Billie Eilish's Bury the Dead. Never heard of it, but it works. It's all dark roads and things that go bump in the night. We've got abandoned teddy bears, air bubbles in a body of water, skulls, wooden cross-shaped headstones, ice cave. It's a good 2 minutes, but it's kind of a bop in a Michael Jackson Thriller kind of way because the tune is catchy, but the images are creepy AF. We come back in and we finally meet one of our two leads, Evangeline Navarro, who has been called into the crab factory where a man who has been hit with a bucket lies on the ground motionless. Kind of turned out he may have deserved it as he turned up at his partner's place of work and threw the first punch at her. Navarro is in the middle of arresting him for assault and battery when she gets a call that causes her to pause. And that is conveniently the 10-minute mark and where I'm going to leave it. But I will say that we do meet Chief Liz Danvers, our central protagonist, in the next scene as she turns up to the Tasala Research Centre. And as an intro, I'm getting supernatural vibes, which is really unexpected. Like, I assumed it was going to be dark, not just because the word night is in the name, but it just was giving me sort of that dark police drama energy, but I wasn't getting supernatural at all from some of the trailers that I saw. So yeah, that really took me by surprise. I think the haunting music and the whole mise-en-scène is just incredible and really infuses that suspicion and that sort of creepy, eerie feeling that something is not quite right and that maybe we should all start looking under the bed before we go to sleep. That reindeer sequence at the beginning where they all sort of hear something that nobody else hears and then they just decide to commit mass suicide was a great method of foreshadowing, I think, for what will then perhaps happen to the scientists at the Tasala Research Centre. With Navarro being called into the crab factory, I think the crab factory itself and the domestic issues that have taken place in there really gives a sense of the town that we will be spending time in. And yeah, I think lastly, all there is to say in terms of the sense I got from the opening is the whole third day of night thing and how they mark days in the calendar. And third day of night, third of how many? How long is this night going to last? And it's just wild, like night, like just night all the time. For like 6 months, I'm guessing. But it also makes me think that perhaps that's what's going to make everybody go gaga. Maybe there is no supernatural element. Maybe it's just the night. In terms of our main characters, we have two. The first being Liz Danvers, and she is the no-shit-taking chief of the Ennis Police Department. One thing to say about Liz Danvers is that she holds her cards close to her chest. From what we see in the pilot episode, it seems that if she has an inkling or a feeling about something or a suspicion, she's likely to keep it to herself until a moment presents itself for her to reveal what she knows. We also see that she's the kind of woman who's willing to bend the rules, well, at least in her direction, and it kind of makes sense. It's a small town. You pull favours where you can, and you don't pull punches unless you have to. We see this in the way that she procures files she needs for the case, and for the way that she keeps a drunk driver locked up in the cell, despite them being incredibly annoying when another police officer opens their cell and just wants them to go home because they're being so annoying. We don't know too much about Danvers' family life. We know that she's got a daughter, Leah, that is not her biological daughter, and perhaps a son, Holden, who is no longer alive. There is a really creepy scene where we see and she feels the hand of a small child on her shoulder, and we hear the word, "she's awake," which are the same words we hear Clark, one of the Tasala Arctic Research Station scientists, say in the opening 10 minutes. When Danvers gets up, there is a stuffed polar bear on the floor. And you know what? She doesn't question any of these things at all. I've got questions. Who put that polar bear on the floor? Unless she sleeps with it and like it got tossed out of her bed in the middle of the night. I don't know. But it was definitely weird. And she just kind of got up and went along like nothing even happened. I don't know. Maybe these kind of like supernatural-esque things happen to her all the time. Next, we have Evangeline Navarro, and she is a former army soldier and also a former police officer, now trooper. I don't know what the difference is, but clearly there is one, and the lines have been drawn in this town. Now, Navarro seems to have been kicked off of the police force for getting too involved in a case, and we'll get to what that case is in a little bit. She is of Native American descent, which in a way links to the surprising cultural element in TDNC. There is a community of Native Americans living in Ennis, the town where this all takes place. And I think it'll be interesting to continue to explore how they feed into the world/story more. In terms of family, Navarro has a sister called Jules who is not well. Now, we don't know what kind of illness she has and how bad she can get, but that is definitely something that Navarro herself is dealing with. Delving deeper into the relationship between Danvers and Navarro, firstly to say is that Danvers treats Navarro like a fly to be swatted, and Navarro thinks Danvers is cold and disrespectful, which is fair because Danvers often makes light but culturally offensive jokes at Navarro's expense. But the reason these two are so entangled is because there was a case. This case involved a victim called Anne Kautok, who was stabbed multiple times and also had her tongue cut out. The murder weapon was never found, neither was the tongue. Discovering who brutally murdered Anne Kautok was Navarro's responsibility, but during her time on the force, she never managed to close the case. Now, this was all before Danvers moved to town, and when she did, Navarro is off the case, but she begs Danvers to pick it up. But Danvers doesn't, or at least pretends not to, and that is the main point of contention in their relationship. Now, at the Tasala Research Centre, although 8 scientists have disappeared, a tongue has turned up, and this pulls Navarro back in, thinking that the cases could be connected. Danvers and Navarro clearly dislike each other, but I get the sense that their equal hard-headedness will be put aside to catch the bad guy. Hopefully. In terms of an antagonist, there technically isn't one. I mean, somebody killed a bunch of people, so once we discover who they are, they'll probably be the antagonist. But until that happens, I think we can point the finger at 2 key antagonists. The first being Ennis, the town that all of this is taking place in. And I say this because with the unsolved murder of Anne Kautok, when Navarro confronts Danvers into why she didn't look into who could have possibly killed Kautok, Danvers plainly says Ennis killed Anne. Ennis, of course, being the town. There are a multitude of reasons to her declaration, which I suspect we will find out as the series goes on. I finally get to have my moment because the next antagonist I would say is the weather, or in this case, the night. And yes, the onslaught of snow and the whole isolation and perpetual night thing isn't brand new. Read Fargo and A Murder at the End of the World. I think it makes an interesting landscape for people to get up to no good and perhaps use it as an excuse as well. Okay, it is now time for a quick interlude as we take a look at what TV and film life is looking like beyond the pilot principle. And first, books, because I finally finished Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And this was a really popular book last year, and a lot of people really enjoyed it and empathized with it, and it just broke them a million times over. Personally, I'm perfectly whole. I think I ended up giving it a kind 3 stars on Goodreads, but in reality, it's probably more of a 2.5 from me. 2 if I'm being cruel, but I'm not. All I will say is that I think the first half of the book was done really well. The second half of the book, not so well. The characters didn't really have any growth. There's one drastic thing that the writer does to really try to force you to emote with the situation the characters are in, and it kind of worked, but ultimately by the end I realised that I just didn't care about the 2 main characters, Sam and Sadie, and I was glad when they went on their merry ways. Also in TV, I started The Brother's Son on Netflix. I've only watched the pilot episode, and so far it's a decent watch. I really enjoy a good fight scene and some action and some comedy, and I feel like that's what it's bringing to the table. So yeah, I'm looking forward to pressing play on the 2nd episode. In regards to film, I finally, 4 years later, rewatched Christopher Nolan's Tenet. And it was great because I watched it at home, I was able to press pause, I was able to rewind, I was able to have subtitles so I could actually hear what the F everybody was saying. Every 20 minutes I paused it, I took stock of where we are right then and there, I rewound it just to make sure I understood things. Yeah, it was a great time being able to control that element of the viewing experience with a film that was so complicated. However, by the end of this movie, I realised I still had no idea what the F I still don't understand inversion at all, how it works, what part is in, why they could see themselves in the past, but then present and then future, and it was just a lot. And I really should have just taken the advice of the scientist we meet at the beginning who says, don't try to understand it, just feel it, because I definitely felt a headache after watching it, but you know what, I enjoyed it. Would I watch it again? Maybe in another 4 years. And finally, today I watched Poor Things, which is the Emma Stone and Willem Dafoe movie that came out in the UK actually only on the 12th of January. So I think a lot of people have watched it last year in prep for award season because obviously it's been nominated for a bunch of things. But in the UK, we had to wait and I really enjoyed it. I had no idea what I was walking into when I went to go and see it. And after I sort of got through the first 10-20 minutes, sort of just understanding the world and the characters and what was going on, I had a great time. I laughed out loud. I had thoughts about what it means to start afresh and to be new again and having control of your life, etc. It was weird. It was weird. Whether the meanings I invoked from it were actually there to be invoked or I made them up, it doesn't matter because I had a really good time and I would definitely recommend Poor Things. Before we head back to your regularly scheduled listening, don't forget to follow at Pilot Principle on Instagram and Twitter/X, where we can chat about the latest in film and TV and perhaps even books. In terms of what I really liked about part 1, the pilot episode of True Detective Night Country, firstly, you really get a sense of the oppressiveness of the town Ennis where all of this takes place, especially once the shadow of perpetual night falls. It really felt like a heavy weight sitting on your chest as you're watching everything. You're almost craving the light, and knowing that you won't have it for weeks, if not months, really weighs on you. And I think that really comes across in the pilot episode overall. There are also some really interesting visuals. There was a scene where Navarro is driving her truck and she has to stop because there is a polar bear with a missing eye in the middle of the road. Now, part of me almost wants to say that she made up the polar bear, because didn't I say earlier that Danvers had a stuffed polar bear at the foot of her bed? Or maybe I'm just reading too much into this. You know, this isn't Tar. Maybe it is just what it is and we're just invoking crazy things. But I think the visuals throughout were really interesting, even with the reindeer at the beginning. And we get a nice shot of crabs in the crab factory at one point. And as I'm mentioning all these animals, it's now making me think that, you know how they always say animals can sense the supernatural and things like that? Perhaps that's also something that they're trying to hint at here. I don't know. I could just be chatting shit. Finally, what I really enjoyed in the pilot episode is the music. At one stage, there was a deftly haunting rendition of the One for Sorrow nursery rhyme. You know, one's for sorrow, two's for joy, three's for a girl, four's for a boy. But imagine that, but like creepy AF. Like that plinky plonky music box type vibe. It was just so freaking odd, but they just kept hammering on our heads the sense of tone and the sense of style, and I really get that. I feel like I can close my eyes and I am in Night Country, and I think everything from the oppressiveness, the visuals and the sound all help inspire that, and I think that was done really, really well in the pilot episode. In terms of what I didn't like, to be honest, there's not really much I can say. I do think at certain stages it was quite slow. But of course, like most things in the horror/supernatural genre, if that's what this is, it is a bit more of a slow burn. So yes, that does make sense. But there were times that I specifically was interested in having the story be pushed forward further, but instead it was more intrigue upon intrigue upon intrigue, which also reminds me that there were a lot of characters whose family links we didn't quite know, and yes, we'll kind of get to it, but it was more than two and it just left too many questions on top of all the other questions I had going on. But those are two very minor dislikes in this pilot episode. Now, before we get on to whether or not I will be continuing with True Detective Night Country, let's remind ourselves of the synopsis. When 8 men vanish, Navarro convinces Danvers that the case is linked to a past murder. Jodie Foster stars. Now, I will say that I did enjoy the writing and the characterizations. Everybody felt unique. I could picture each person and their personality and their quirks quite clearly, even now. The setting is, of course, great, and it brings its own set of dangers to the story as a whole. The pace was relatively non-existent, as I said. No one is really in much of a hurry, and to an extent, I get it. Nobody has been kidnapped, but there are 8 people missing in a suspicious circumstance. But I suppose Danvers and everybody else presumes that these 8 scientists are already dead and they just haven't come across the body. So because of that, there seems to be no hurry from the police or from anybody in this town, which then affects the pace. In terms of the serial arc, there are 2 murders to solve. Well, technically 9. So that will definitely transpire throughout the 6 episodes. Also within the serial arc, I'm sure we will get to know a little bit more about Danvers and Navarro, specifically their past and how that has informed their present. There was also talk in the pilot episode about the mines that need to be closed, the mines that people didn't want to be closed. And so I'm guessing that will factor in a little bit more, especially as that could potentially have something to do with what happened to Anne Kautok. In terms of the end of episode hook, we kind of have two-ish. The first is that Danvers discovers a link between Anne Kautok, the murdered victim from a few years ago, and one of the 8 research scientists that had disappeared. Finally, Rose Aguineau, who is played by Fiona Shaw, follows the ghost of Travis, we don't know who Travis is yet, and discovers the frozen bodies of the missing scientists. Well, at least 3 that I could see. It was an inevitable end of episode hook, and not exactly gripping if I'm perfectly honest with you, but there we have it. The bodies of the scientists have been found, and the question is, of course, how the F did they get to the middle of this frozen rotunda where they are found? Now there's only one question left. Will I be continuing with True Detective Night Country? Pause for dramatic effect. It is a reluctant and nepotistic yes from me. I am banking on the fact that the other series of True Detectives were really well received despite not being completely sold by the end of episode hook. However, with that being said, the pilot episode is so far really quite odd, and I am interested in how far they'll push this possible supernatural element that has come through in the pilot episode. I also do really like Navarro, and for 2 hot seconds debated getting my cheeks pierced, and I really like Danvers, so I want to see how their relationship continues throughout the course of the series, or at least the second episode. But that is, of course, just me. Now, if you prefer a more by-the-book police drama, you know, DIs, DCIs, mom, private and personal lives stay separate, then you may feel a little claustrophobic with True Detective Night Country. If you are not a fan of subgenres, you know, you prefer your supernaturals in the supernatural and your drama in the drama, then the possible infusion of those 2 genres may not work for you. And if you get SAD during this time of the year, then this will only exacerbate that, and you may want to hold off watching this until summer, if at all. Now, in terms of a pilot score, I think I'm going to go with 3. Yes, I'm going to go with 3. And that has really been bolstered by the setting, which adds to the creepiness, the perpetual darkness, makes it unique, and invites the idea of jumping at your own shadow. Danvers and Navarro so far have great head-butting chemistry, and I like both of them as individuals. I will say there were a lot of offhandedly met characters, and it's nice that this world existed before we press play, but it kind of just made us work a little bit too hard for those Z-plots or those setups in episode 1 where we wouldn't even have a payoff until episode 6. But what do you think? What would you have given the pilot episode of True Detective Night Country? Now that we have hashed out the fundamental principles, will you be giving the pilot episode a watch? Or are you planning to save and binge all 6 episodes of True Detective Night Country when they are all out? There's been a couple of police-related pilots back-to-back on the pilot principle. Fool Me Once, After the Flood, True Detective Night Country. So I will try and shake things up for next week. So make sure to follow the pilot principle on your audio streamer of choice. And don't forget you can chat to me over on Threads, Instagram and Twitter/X at Pilot Principle. And if I don't see you there, then I will catch you on the next episode. Aww.